in the Iron Mask is improvisations and additions to a rather simple original story.
The story of the Man in the Iron Mask is one of the greatest mysteries in history, and it begins during a time when kings and queens ruled with almost complete power, when secrets were guarded with silence, and when one single man could be locked away for life without trial, without name, and without explanation. This prisoner has fascinated people for over 300 years. He was held in different prisons, moved from one fortress to another, and yet his true identity was always kept hidden, as if his very existence was a danger to the king and his kingdom. Imagine being a man erased from history while still alive, stripped of name, family, and freedom, and forced to live and die behind iron bars with only a mask to hide your face. That was the cruel fate of the prisoner we now call the Man in the Iron Mask. His story is not just about who he was, but about power, secrecy, and how far rulers will go to protect themselves. The story first began in France during the reign of King Louis XIV, who was known as the Sun King. He ruled for over 70 years and created one of the most powerful and wealthy kingdoms in all of Europe. But with power came fear of betrayal, fear of scandal, and fear of enemies both inside and outside his court. Around the year 1669, a mysterious man was arrested. He was not treated like an ordinary criminal. Instead, he was placed under the direct supervision of a jailer named Benin d'Auvergne de Saint-Mars, a man trusted by the king himself. This prisoner was moved secretly from prison to prison. First Pignerol, then Exiles, then Sainte Marguerite Island, and finally the fortress of the Bastille. In Paris, everywhere he went, the rules were the same. He was never allowed to speak of who he was. He could not write letters, and his guards were ordered to kill him if he ever revealed his name. This level of secrecy was extraordinary. It shows us just how dangerous the king thought this man's knowledge was. The mask is what made the prisoner unforgettable. Early sources say he wore a mask of black velvet, but later stories turned it into a mask made of iron. The idea of iron made the mystery darker, more dramatic, and more terrifying. Imagine a man forced to wear such a mask day and night, unable to show his face to the world, unable to eat or breathe freely. Whether the mask was truly iron or just velvet, it became the symbol of his silence and suffering. People wondered, why must his face be hidden? Was he too important, too recognizable, too dangerous? Was he someone who looked like the king himself, or someone whose identity could shake the throne? The mask made him more than just a prisoner. It made him a legend. As the years went on, whispers about the masked prisoner spread across France. Some people thought he was a political rival. Others thought he might be the brother of the king. Even the writers and thinkers of the time could not resist speculating. The famous philosopher Voltaire, who was once imprisoned in the Bastille himself, wrote about the mysterious prisoner. Voltaire claimed that the Man in the Iron Mask was someone of noble blood, a person too important to kill, but too dangerous to release. Later, the novelist Alexandre Dumas took the story and turned it into one of the greatest legends in literature, imagining the prisoner as the hidden twin brother of King Louis XIV, locked away so that the truth would never be revealed. These stories spread across Europe, giving the prisoner a kind of immortality. He was no longer just a man locked away, he was a symbol of secrecy, injustice, and mystery. Life in the prisons of the 1600s and 1700s was harsh. The cells were small, damp, and dark, with little food and almost no comfort. For the Man in the Iron Mask, things were even worse. His jailer, Saint Mars, followed strict orders. The prisoner could not talk to anyone except under certain conditions, and even then, the guards had to stand far away so they could not hear his words. He was completely cut off from the world. When he was moved from one prison to another, he was transported secretly, his face hidden. Every detail of his life was controlled. The few items he was allowed were burned or destroyed after use, to ensure nothing carried his name or handwriting. It was as if the king wanted to erase every trace of him. When he finally died in 1703, his cell was cleaned, his belongings destroyed, and his name was recorded falsely as Marcaeli in the prison register. Even in death, his identity was buried. What makes this story so powerful is not only the mystery of who the prisoner was, but also the cruelty of what was done to him. A man lived in silence for more than 30 years, locked away from sunlight, family, and freedom. Because of a secret he could not reveal, his only mark on history was the mask on his face and the silence forced upon him. And yet, that silence became louder than the king ever expected. For centuries after, people have asked, who was the man in the iron mask? Why was he imprisoned? And what truth was so dangerous that it had to be hidden at such a terrible cost? When we talk about the man in the iron mask, the biggest question is always, who was he? Over the years, countless theories have been suggested, and each one adds a new layer to the mystery. Some ideas sound believable, while others sound like stories made for drama and entertainment. But together, they show us just how much this mystery captured the imagination of people across the centuries. Let's look at the most famous theories. One of the earliest and most powerful ideas came from Voltaire, the famous French writer and philosopher. In the 1700s, Voltaire wrote that the man in the iron mask was a person of noble blood, someone who was treated with respect even while imprisoned. According to him, the prisoner was not an ordinary man. Voltaire suggested that he might have been the brother of King Louis XIV, maybe even his twin. If true, this would mean the king had locked away his own family to keep his throne safe. This idea shocked people and made the mystery even more fascinating. Voltaire's version made the prisoner into a symbol of royal cruelty and secrecy. Later, Alexandre Dumas, the author of The Three Musketeers, turned this theory into a dramatic story. In his novel, the man in the iron mask is actually the twin brother of Louis XIV, hidden away so that no one would know the truth. Dumas's version became so popular that many people believed it could be real. After all, it explained why the mask was needed, because if the prisoner's face looked exactly like the king's, then anyone who saw him would know the secret. This romantic idea of a hidden twin has lasted for centuries and is still one of the most popular explanations. Even though historians doubt it, other theories suggest the prisoner was not a royal twin, but an illegitimate child of the king's family. Some thought he was the son of Anne of Austria, the queen mother, from a secret relationship. Others thought he was the child of powerful nobles whose existence could cause a scandal. If he was an illegitimate heir, then his claim to the throne might have been strong enough to threaten Louis XIV by locking him away. The king could protect his power. Again, the mask would make sense. He looked like the royal family. His face alone could reveal the truth, but not all theories focus on royal blood. Some say the prisoner was simply a man who knew too much. One popular idea is that he was a Stashdogger, a servant who discovered a dangerous political secret. Maybe he overheard private talks about foreign alliances or secret crimes committed by the powerful. Some historians think he knew about financial scandals involving high officials, and that knowledge made him a risk. Instead of killing him, they locked him away forever. This explanation may not sound as dramatic as a royal twin, but it feels realistic. It matches the way the prisoner was treated, carefully hidden, kept alive but completely silenced. Other theories take us into the world of spies and international politics. Some believed he was an English noble or a secret agent working against France. At that time, France had many enemies: England, Spain, the Dutch Republic. If the prisoner was a captured spy who knew too much about military or diplomatic secrets, the king would want him silenced. Another idea was that he was an Italian nobleman named Count Ercole Antonio Mattioli, who betrayed France in secret negotiations. This theory gained strength because the name Marcaeli was used in the prison records when the masked man died. It might have been a mistake, or it might have been a deliberate trick to hide the truth. There were even stranger theories. Some said he was a disgraced general who had angered the king. Others thought he was the real father of Louis XIV, hidden away so that no one could question the king's legitimacy. Still others believed he was part of an occult conspiracy, someone who knew dark secrets about the court, maybe even about alchemy or forbidden sciences. These theories sound like wild stories, but they show how much people were willing to imagine. because the truth was locked away so tightly. What connects all these theories is the mask. The mask was not just a piece of cloth or iron, it was a symbol. It made the prisoner's face invisible, and therefore his identity invisible. People wondered if his face had to be hidden, it must mean he was someone recognizable, someone whose identity could not be revealed. The mask gave power to every rumor, every guess. Without the mask, he might have been just another forgotten prisoner. With it, he became a living riddle. This endless guessing turned the man in the iron mask into a legend. He was not just a prisoner anymore. He was a story that people told to criticize kings, to question power, and to imagine hidden truths. In Voltaire's hands, he became a symbol of royal tyranny. In Dumas's novel, he became a tragic hero, a brother denied his birthright. In later times, movies and plays turned him into everything from a romantic figure to a political victim. The mask gave everyone the freedom to imagine their own version of the truth, but behind all these myths and theories was a real human being. Whoever he was, he lived for decades in silence, cut off from the world, carrying a secret he could never share. The legends may have made him larger than life, but the reality of his suffering was simple and cruel. And that brings us to what modern historians believe. Because while the myths made him a prince or a twin, the truth that researchers have uncovered is far less glamorous and far more tragic in recent years. Historians have studied old records, letters, and prison documents to solve the mystery of the man in the iron mask. What they have discovered is that the truth is not as romantic or exciting as the novels and movies will suggest. Instead, the story is darker and sadder, because it shows how an ordinary man could be erased from the world simply because he knew something the powerful did not want revealed. Most modern historians agree that the man in the iron mask was probably Eustache Dogger, a servant arrested in 1669. Dogger was not a prince, not a twin, and not a secret heir. He was a man who somehow became involved in dangerous secrets at the French court. Some records suggest that Dogger was connected to financial scandals involving high-ranking officials. Others suggest he overheard private conversations about political or military plans. Whatever he knew, it was enough to make the king order his lifelong imprisonment. This explanation fits the facts, the way he was guarded so strictly. The secrecy around his name, and the fact that he was not executed but kept alive in silence. Killing him would have drawn attention. Keeping him hidden erased him quietly. The mask, too, becomes clearer in this version. Historians think he may have worn a black velvet mask for special occasions, especially when being transported to make sure no one recognized him. The later stories about an iron mask were probably exaggerations created to make the story more dramatic. A velvet mask is still cruel, but not as inhuman as iron. Yet the legend of the iron mask spread because it symbolized suffering and secrecy so powerfully. Over time, people remembered the symbol more than the truth. This conclusion may feel disappointing to some. After all, the idea of a secret twin brother or hidden prince is more exciting. But the truth in many ways is worse. It tells us that you did not have to be royal or powerful to suffer such a terrible fate. Even a servant could be locked away for life if he knew the wrong secret. The story becomes not about royal scandal, but about the cruelty of absolute power. The man in the iron mask was not imprisoned because he was extraordinary, but because he was ordinary, and because the king had the power to make him vanish. His death in 1703 was quiet. He had lived in silence for more than 3 decades. His name was recorded falsely, his belongings destroyed, and his story buried. The king who ordered his imprisonment lived on, remembered as the Sun King, one of the most glorious rulers in French history. But the masked prisoner became something else, a ghost in history, a riddle that refused to disappear. The fact that we still talk about him today shows how powerful his silence was. And here is why people say the truth is not good. Because when we peel away the myths, we see the cruelty of the system that allowed such a thing to happen. This was not the tale of a hidden prince unfairly denied a crown. It was the tale of a man stripped of everything, not because of what he did, but because of what he knew. It shows us how fragile freedom was under an absolute monarchy, how little it took for someone to vanish, and how even in death, their name could be erased. Yet, the mystery continues to inspire people. Movies still retell the story, often choosing the more romantic version of a secret royal twin. Writers still debate the possibilities. And viewers like you today still wonder, what if the truth was different? What if the mask really did hide a royal face? What if the king's own brother was locked away? These questions live on because the mask left space for imagination. The real tragedy is that the man behind it never had that choice. He lived and died in silence, while the world argued about who he was in the end. The Man in the Iron Mask is a reminder of both myth and reality. The myth gave us stories of hidden princes, daring secrets, and dramatic betrayals. The reality gave us a human being who suffered for knowledge he could never reveal. Both sides matter, because together they explain why this story has lasted so long. People need legends, but they also need truth. And the truth in this case is not good, because it shows how absolute power can destroy even the smallest life. So when we remember the Man in the Iron Mask, we should think of him not only as a legend in a novel, but also as a symbol of lost freedom, erased identity, and the cruelty of silence. He was a man whose face we will never truly see, whose name we will never truly know, but whose suffering still echoes after centuries. That is why his story continues to haunt us, the mystery of the Man in the Iron Mask has lived on for more than 300 years. And even though historians today believe they have uncovered the truth, the story continues to fascinate us. Why? Because it is not just about one man locked away in silence, but about what his story says about power, secrecy, and the fragility of human life when it is controlled by rulers with absolute authority. For centuries, people wanted to believe the prisoner was someone special, a prince, a royal twin, a hidden heir. That version of the story makes him seem powerful, almost like a tragic hero, someone who had to be hidden because he threatened the throne. Writers like Voltaire and Alexandre Dumas helped build this myth, turning him into a legend that inspired novels, plays, and films. Their versions gave people drama and excitement, something larger than life, and in a way, this was comforting, because it made his suffering seem meaningful. If the prisoner was a royal twin, then his silence was part of a grand story. But when we look at what historians now believe, the truth is not romantic at all. The prisoner was most likely Eustache Dogger, an ordinary servant who stumbled into secrets too dangerous to reveal. He was not locked away because he was powerful, but because he was powerless. He had no allies, no status, and no way to fight against the king's orders. His mask, whether velvet or iron, was not a symbol of royal blood, but a symbol of how far a king would go to erase a life. His fate was not extraordinary. It was cruel in its ordinariness. And this is why people say the conclusion of the story is not good, because instead of being a tale about a hidden prince, it is about how fragile human freedom was under the rule of absolute monarchy. The king did not need proof, trial, or justice. He only needed to decide that someone was dangerous, and that person could vanish forever. The Man in the Iron Mask reminds us that in such a system, even the smallest person could become the victim of enormous power. At the same time, the mask gave him immortality. If Dogger had been executed quietly, his name would have been forgotten, just another servant erased by history. But the mask made him unforgettable. It made people ask questions, create stories, and pass the legend on through generations. Ironically, the attempt to erase him gave him eternal life in history. Today, millions know the legend even if they do not know his real name. In that sense, the mask protected his memory, even as it destroyed his life. The real tragedy is not only what happened to the prisoner, but what it represents about society in his time. The France of Louis XIV was a place of great art, culture, and glory. But it was also a place of censorship, fear, and ruthless control. Behind the golden halls of Versailles, secrets were hidden in dark prisons. The Man in the Iron Mask became the shadow of the Sun King's brightness, the reminder that even the most splendid empire rested on cruelty and silence. When we think of him today, we may never know every detail of his life, but we know what he stands for. He stands for the silenced, for those who had no voice, for those who were erased because they were inconvenient. His story forces us to ask hard questions about power. Who decides what should be hidden? How far should rulers go to protect themselves? And what happens to ordinary people when they become trapped in those decisions? The man in the iron mask will always remain a mystery in some way, because his true identity can never be proven with absolute certainty. Records were destroyed, names were changed, and the king made sure of it. But maybe the point is not whether he was a prince, a servant, or a spy. Maybe the point is what his story reveals about human history, that behind every throne, behind every powerful ruler, there are secrets, victims, and forgotten lives. So as we close this story, think of the prisoner not only as a legend in books or films, but as a real human being who suffered in silence for over 30 years. Think of the walls that surrounded him, the mask that hid his face, the loneliness that filled his days. He may never have spoken his truth, but the world has been speaking about him ever since. And perhaps that is his final victory, that his silence has become louder than the voices of the kings who tried to erase him. The man in the iron mask remains one of history's greatest puzzles, not because of what we know, but because of what we will never know. And maybe that is why his story endures. Legends fade, kings die, but mysteries live forever.